In August 1876, a man stood over a grave in Mycenae, holding a golden mask he had just pulled out of the ground, and sent a telegram to the king of Greece. He said he had gazed upon the face of Agamemnon, the king who led the Greeks against Troy. It became one of the most famous sentences in the history of archaeology. There are three problems with it. The mask is roughly 300 years too old to be Agamemnon. Schliemann himself never once wrote that name on it in his official records, and a century later scholars started asking whether he made the mask himself. You may recognize the name. Heinrich Schliemann was the businessman who had excavated Troy 2 years earlier and announced he'd found the treasure of King Priam, a hoard that turned out to be roughly 1,000 years too old for the war he was looking for. He'd photographed his wife wearing the jewelry and published the images worldwide. He'd also smuggled that treasure out of the Ottoman Empire, which is a crime, not an eccentricity. So when he showed up in Greece wanting to dig at Mycenae, the Greek government did something sensible. They assigned him a minder. An archaeologist named Panagiotis Stamatakis was posted to watch him and report back. Schliemann's entire justification for digging there was a phrase Homer repeats in the Iliad: Mycenae, rich in gold. That was it. That was the research method. Take a poem literally and start digging. In the summer of 1876, just inside the citadel's main gate, the famous Lion Gate, the team found a circular stone enclosure 27 meters across. It was built from 2 parallel rows of upright stone slabs roughly the height of a person, with the gap between them packed with stone and earth. Inside it were 6 shaft graves, and inside those the remains of 19 people, men, women, and children. Carved stone markers stood over the graves showing warriors in chariots and hunting scenes, meaning this was never meant to be a place people forgot. And piled around the bodies was more than 15 kilograms of gold, jewelry, cups, weapons, masks. That is in the same order of magnitude as what was found in a single one of Tutankhamun's coffins half a century later. Homer's phrase about a city rich in gold turned out not to be poetic exaggeration. Schliemann and his government minder did not get along, and the reason matters. Stamatakis insisted on recording and preserving everything that came out of the ground, including Greek and Roman pottery fragments, material from centuries after the period Schliemann cared about. Schliemann, who was only interested in Homer's era, had anything he considered irrelevant thrown out on the spot. Whole layers of evidence were discarded because they were from the wrong story. He also paid his workers by the volume of earth removed rather than by hours worked, which meant nobody had any incentive to slow down and look at what they were digging through. And Stamatakis wrote something else in his reports to his superiors, which is the detail that quietly reframes this entire story. Every single time Schliemann opened a new grave, he announced he had found Agamemnon. Not once, every time. He had already made that claim several times over before he ever lifted the 5th mask. The famous telegram wasn't a moment of revelation. It was the version of the announcement that finally stuck, because that time he happened to be holding something spectacular. 5 golden masks came out of those graves. 4 of them were made the same way. Thin sheet gold hammered flat, features barely raised, more symbol than portrait. The 5th was different. It was worked in 3 dimensions with real depth to the face. The ears had been cut out separately and attached. It had a carefully detailed beard and mustache. Where the other 4 looked like masks, this one looks like a man. It looked to a 19th century European eye exactly like a portrait of a king. That's the one Schliemann lifted when he sent his telegram. Here's the part almost nobody knows. The phrase Mask of Agamemnon doesn't appear in the record until 1915, decades after Schliemann's death, in a preliminary report written by a different archaeologist. Schliemann never gave it that name in writing. The name was supplied afterward by everyone else because the story was too good not to finish. As dating methods improved in the 20th century, the problem became unavoidable. The mask and the graves date to roughly 1550 to 1500 BCE. The Trojan War, if it happened, is placed around 1200 BCE. That is a gap of 3 to 4 centuries. To put that in perspective, the distance between this mask and Agamemnon is roughly the distance between us and the founding of the American colonies. Nobody would mistake one for the other. And it isn't only a modern problem. The Lion Gate that the excavation team walked through to reach the graves was built around 1250 BCE, meaning the gate is younger than the graves it appears to guard. The graves were originally outside the walls. Later, Mycenaean kings expanded the fortification specifically to bring their ancestors' tombs inside, then built a raised precinct and altars over them. So even to the Mycenaeans who might have fought at Troy, the people in these graves were already distant ancestors from centuries earlier. Then it gets worse. In the late 20th century, 2 classicists, William Calder III and David Trail, argued that the mask might be a forgery. Their case: Schliemann had already been caught at Troy planting objects from other sites and announcing their discovery. They pointed out that the mask's beard and handlebar mustache look less like Mycenaean art and more like 19th century European facial hair fashion, and that its eyebrows are rendered differently from the other four masks. The counter-argument is strong. Genuinely ancient gold develops a reddish surface discoloration over millennia. Excavation-era accounts describe that discoloration being present on the mask when it came out, which is difficult to fake on short notice in a field trench in front of a government minder who was actively looking for exactly this kind of fraud. The large majority of Aegean archaeologists today accept the mask as authentic. Their position is more precise and more deflating than either the forgery claim or Schliemann's telegram. It's real, it's just not Agamemnon. It belonged to some Mycenaean ruler several generations before any Trojan War could have happened, a man whose actual name nobody has ever known and probably never will. Set the forgery argument aside, because something more important happened here. Before Schliemann dug at Mycenae, European scholars treated Mycenaean civilization as literary invention, the same way they treated Troy. The assumption was that Bronze Age Greece had been a scattering of primitive settlements, and that Homer had invented the palaces and the gold wholesale. Then 19 bodies and 15 kilograms of gold came out of the ground, and it stopped being arguable that a wealthy, powerful Bronze Age civilization had existed in Greece. Whoever the mask belonged to, this excavation is what moved an entire era out of mythology and into history. Scholars began calling that Bronze Age Greek civilization Mycenaean, after the city where it was dug up. A place name from a poem became the name of a period, which leaves the larger question underneath all of this. Whether Agamemnon was ever a real person has never been settled. Most scholars now accept that the city of Troy existed. We covered the evidence for that in an earlier episode, including Hittite records naming the place. But no evidence has ever surfaced for the king who supposedly led the coalition against it. Not an inscription, not a tablet, not a single independent mention. So what we're actually looking at is a city whose existence is confirmed and a king whose existence is not, welded together across a 300-year gap by a single golden mask that neither of them ever touched. Late in life, Schliemann is reported to have said something that closes the story better than any archaeologist could. So this is not Agamemnon, and these are not his ornaments. Fine, then let's call him Schulze. Schulze, the German equivalent of calling someone John Smith. A man who spent his entire life and his entire fortune trying to prove a myth was real, finally setting it down with a shrug and a joke. And yet, the mask is still displayed in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, still labeled the Mask of Agamemnon. The correction has been available for over a century. Nobody wants it. 3,500 years ago, a craftsman in Mycenae hammered gold over a dead man's face. He had no idea that face would eventually be called by the name of the most famous king in Greek mythology, or that people would argue about it for 150 years. He was just trying to send his ruler off using the most valuable material he had. History doesn't disappear, we just haven't finished listening yet. If you want to keep digging into the stories history left buried, subscribe to Witness to Time.